This is the Dane Moore NBA podcast brought to you by the Genesis Company, coming at you Wednesday afternoon. It's December 13th after the Wolves played the Pelicans on Monday and lost. And before they play the Mavs on Thursday in Dallas, I have Britt Robson from MinPost here with me today, who just finished writing what I thought was a pretty fitting column for the moment. At least, Britt, I took the thrust of the column to be now comes the hard part, which is interesting because a week ago we were talking about now comes the hard part kind of too. We're just looking at the schedule. But I think for me, seeing it on Monday and seeing a more difficult, path to winning an individual game, and or not, against a different opponent and on the road, it had been that stat you put in your column too. The next 4 weeks is 16 games against teams who are all over 500, 11 of which are on the road. Sometimes you kind of need to see what that is. You go, are those just numbers that are put there to scare you a little bit? And I liked how you were now comes the hard part, but it doesn't take at all away from what the strength of the beginning of the season was. It doesn't anticipate things falling apart. It basically just anticipates, these next 16 games, they might lose more than 2 after they just won 16 of 18 there. So just
it warns us that we're spoiled. Essentially is what it boils down to. I mean, if this team loses 3 out of 4, guess what? A lot of 17-4 teams lose 3 out of 4, especially against quality opponents, especially if most of them are on the road. So 17-4 is a 67 win pace. If anybody really thought that the Wolves were going to be, in that realm, and if they finish 500 in these 16 games, they'll be 25-12. Guess what? That's a 55 win pace.
Super good.
55 wins. If they lose as many as they win between now and January 10th, I think it is.
Yep.
Then they're 25-12. Oh my God!
We had an awesome start to the season.
Exactly.
Who would have thought about that before the year? I think, and I said this with Jace yesterday too, where there's also something intriguing to me about this now too. You had a great stat in your piece. The 4 games before New Orleans, we knew we were against bad teams, right? Charlotte, Memphis, San Antonio, and maybe Utah was the other one.
Yep.
But the combined record of those 4 teams thus far is 23-65. So what not that the Pelicans are the best team in the league, but going from that for 8-9 days when you're only playing that to a competitive team that was relatively at full strength in the Pelicans was a big flip, right?
I think it was mentioned a few times on the broadcast and other people mentioned it online. I mean, this isn't any new knowledge, but they got waxed. I mean, if you didn't count the Lakers' fourth quarter points in that game, they still would have won by 21. I mean, that is a thrashing. And so when you get embarrassed that badly, and you are not a bad team, you just had a terrible, terrible game,
right? And
you have 2 days plus another day to prepare. You have a day of rest theoretically, and then 2 days. Your game is 3 days later, and the Wolves don't have Ant. The Pels have Zion. They have McCullough. They were 10-4 with 4 of the 5 guys in that starting lineup. I mean, it just all made sense. And I was actually, as the column kind of indicates, I was pleased with the way they the third quarter turned out to be, I did not realize what an outlier that third quarter was.
In terms of what? Or elaborate.
Well, I mean, in quarters 1, 2, and 4, each team committed 17 fouls. The Pels went to the line 21 times. The Wolves went to the line 17 times. In the third quarter, The Pels went to the line 19 times. The Wolves went to the line twice.
Right.
And the foul situation was 11-3.
But the Pelicans got into the bonus really quickly. I think it was like 2 minutes and 10 seconds or 3 minutes or something like that.
It was something ridiculous. And you know, again, it is a situation where, as I argued online, two things could be true. The refs could be incredibly whistle happy and the Wolves could be fouling a lot. And both of those things combined. But I found it interesting that
I throw in another factor really quick too. Like New Orleans is a downhill team.
Yeah.
That's what they do, right? They're gonna, if there is ever a team that is going to generate a lot of blocking fouls, it would be them. And it's not just Zion, right? It's
Right.
kind of, you saw CJ really has that like stop and go, Trey Young,
Right.
Chris Paul, John
Daniels, Dyson Daniels is a driver, you know,
and that
Jones
could be
is
true.
a driver, right?
But also there was a handful of those that were, sorry, I'm kind of cutting off your thought here, but like
That's right.
a handful of them that were ticky-tacky too. I thought particularly in relation to Nickeil Alexander-Walker and Rudy Gobert, or I don't know if it's a weird like subconscious thing where those guys aren't usually chronic foulers, so I'm more willing, you know, to forgive in those situations that, or question the validity of the ref's call on marginal calls there. But yeah, it was this conflation of a bunch of things that led to a ridiculous free throw total.
8 minutes to go in the third quarter, both Gobert and Na had gone from 2 fouls to 4 fouls in the second half.
Yeah.
So, you know, and one of them is guarding Ingram, their best outside shooter, and the other one is central to the whole interior defense scheme of that game plan. And then on the other side, you know, again, I'm not a ref hollerer as a result. Actually, the way I phrased it in the column isn't like the refs are screwing people. It was like the Wolves usually use every excuse in the book to become martyrs and immature babies about this kind of stuff all last season. And they really had evidence, I think, this time around. And yeah, Gobert said a lot of stuff, but in general, I think they you know, were remarkably calm under the circumstances. And not only that, even though they got out free throwed 19-2 in the third quarter, they outscored the Pelicans 34-31. Yeah. They fought back from 15 down to like 4 down at the end of the period. They have resilience this year.
To get back to the now comes the hard part, which I'm sure we'll talk about. You know, that Pelicans game is naturally going to come up in it because again, it's like chapter 1 or page 1 of the hard part. You put together a list of X factors that in your column that will, I mean, the more of these X factors boxes you check, the less hard, I guess, this, or you will need to sustain this stretch, or maybe to be able to win more games than not.
I think they are factors that if they get answered well, the Wolves do better. If they remain unanswered, the Wolves will be in trouble.
Let's jump right into them because I think they kind of weave into some of the Pelicans things and maybe things going forward here. Number one you had down was finding playmaking in the roster without burning out Mike Conley. Obviously this isn't, we've kind of had our eye on this idea, you know, going back to training camp before we knew this was a really good team of only, well, I guess 2 traditional point guards on the team, if you include Jordan McLaughlin, who wasn't and kind of isn't in the rotation. And that was a big question going into the season too. How would they generate playmaking? Where would they generate playmaking in the, you know, 18 to 20 minutes a night that Mike Conley doesn't play? We now know they need that, right? That is a weakness of a very good team right now. Where are you thinking that comes from? I think there's two separate conversations here, but maybe for this moment, like where does that come from internally? Because I think externally that could potentially be something they look to address at the trade deadline, but that's not till February. Where do they get playmaking without burning out Mike Conley?
I think you go two ways. One, you play J-Mac more. I think that's pretty obvious. I know that in my and one section of special content for super secret, fingers crossed subscribers that want more than the column, I did get a little bit into Finch's tough decisions at the end of the rotation. But essentially one of them is, if you don't play J-Mac, what are you doing there with that backup playmaking spot? Because he is, not only is he a quick decision maker, he puts pace in the game, and he has a multi-year track record, not of shooting well, and not of always being a great on-ball defender because of his size, but as somebody who can create ball movement and quick decisions and jump starting an offense without having to have Mike Conley on the floor. Because one of the things that's interesting about all this is not only does Conley have 50 more assists than anybody else on the team,
Jesus,
but he also has the most three-pointers of anybody on the team and leads the team in three-point percentage. So he is a floor spacer par excellence, and he is also a playmaker par excellence. So even when he does not have the ball in his hand, this is a demerit for J-Mac that Conley has. If J-Mac's hanging up by the three-point line, he's not drawing anybody. If Conley's out by the three-point line on the weak side, he's
frantic scramble. Yeah.
He's creating space.
Yeah.
And so that's one aspect of it. I think more J-Mac. Another answer I would make is we need to get Ant back in his old meaning like 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago.
Hold on. Let's finish the playmaking one first.
Okay. Well, no, I am.
Oh, okay.
In other words, I think Ant's assist to turnover ratio is much better this year than it's been in any other year. He is become, and I mean, and you were in the locker room when I asked Conley how much Ant, talks to him about it. And he said, pretty much all the time. I don't know if he was just trying to, goose it along or not, but it was a very quotable moment where he said, most of what we talk about is angles and, basically the inner workings of point guard play. You could see that in Ant's game. And I'm worried. It's another one of the X factors, which is why you wanted to worry about jumping there. But I think it is, if Ant is in the groove he was in, he will solve a lot of the playmaking problems when Conley is off the floor.
Right.
Because he, like Conley, is a magnet and also a willing passer with pretty good court vision. He's not as good as Conley, but guess what? He's a better scorer. So those two things, far more than gnaw or shake or, combination of, and even Slow-Mo, who I mentioned, Slow-Mo's shooting woes are hurting his playmaking because teams are laying off him, and it's harder to playmake when nobody's guarding you.
Sure.
And so, that's pretty basic. So what Slow-Mo does is he creates action. He drives into people and then dishes. Well, that puts you later into the clock. That gives you less room to look at the floor. There's all different reasons for this. Bottom line here is the Timberwolves have been in the bottom 10 in turnovers the past 2.5 years, last 3 seasons. But they were in the top 10 in assists the previous 2 seasons. This year, they're 23rd in turnovers and 20th in assists. The assists of what have dropped. The turnovers remain a problem and have always been a problem in Finch's offense for whatever reason. But the assists have always been there, and they're not there this year, at least relative to the rest of the league.
And that's somewhat intuitive if we think of the roster. I mean, this is a better roster than those seasons for sure, but it is a roster with less true assisting playmakers, right? Mike Conley is a better player and a better fit on this team. D'Angelo Russell was a high level assister. He had a lot of turnovers there too. You were also playing, you were playing 48 minutes a night of a point guard though, right? And all of those
and
other seasons.
A lot of your shots, a lot of your offense and your generation is coming from bigs. It's coming from Cat. It's coming from Nas. It's coming from Gobert. All three of those guys. Cat, I think, has 2 more assists than turnovers. The other 2 more turnovers than assists.
Right.
And so the Wolves right now have assist to turnover ratio of 1.7 to 1. Mike Conley alone is 6.2 to 1.
Right.
Ridiculous. Tyus Jones levels. And so when he goes to the bench, what that means is, your collective rest of the roster is probably like 1-to-1 ratio.
Yeah.
Which is terrible if you're going to run a half-court offense.
Yeah, it's so it's this idea of, right, the X factor you put down is playmaking without burning out Mike Conley, right? Which means, what are you doing in those other minutes? And I feel like thus far, what they have prioritized is bucket getting rather than playmaking when Mike is off the floor, whether that's Ant, right, who is more of a bucket getter than a playmaker. Kyle, again, to your point, I think he is a playmaker, but it hasn't been as much that way because the shot has
just not as efficient.
Yeah, he has not been as effective there. Nikhil has had a great season, but is not your traditional point guard playmaking in that sort of way. And then Shake Milton is the biggest example of you're looking for a bucket getter here rather than a.
And it's also one of the things I wrote was that thinking Shake Milton had the handle and the temperament to be a backup point guard is the biggest miscalculation in what has been a charm season.
And he hasn't been a bucket getter. I mean, this stat was.
But the last couple games, here he comes.
Yeah. Well, okay. So this even includes the last couple of games. Yeah. I was looking this up. If you look at points per shot attempt this season of all the players in the league who have played over 300 minutes, Shake's played 339. So it's basically anybody in a rotation. Only 2 players in the NBA are generating fewer points per shot attempt than Shake Milton is. And they both are rookies playing for Portland. It's Scoot Henderson and Toumani Camara. So the bucket getter element of and this isn't who Shake for sure is.
Right.
But he has not been the bucket getter and he has not been the playmaker. Right. So it's just I get some people who are like, man, what is this pining for Jordan McLaughlin or whatever? I'm not even saying I'm pining for Jordan McLaughlin necessarily. Maybe it's something else. But what you're aiming at is getting something from Shake Milton here to survive the non-Mike Conley minutes. And you're not even getting what you're aiming at getting.
For the people who say, what's this pining for Jordan McLaughlin? I would say, what's your backup? Seriously.
Right. Yeah.
Give me your alternative. I'll say J-Mac for 14 minutes a night at the point. What are you doing in those 14 minutes?
Yeah. Because what are the alternatives?
Exactly. Well, let's get specific here. I'm not, the guy happens to be statistically a godsend on the court most of the time. Part of that is because he fills lanes on defense, gets a lot of deflections, puts pace in the offense, makes good decisions, and by the way, has a historically great assist to turnover ratio. As does the guy ahead of him in the rotation.
And
Mike
your
Conley.
point is that's what this team needs, which you laid out really well, is the only player who is having a good assist to turnover ratio this season is Mike Conley. Everyone else has been
right. Well, Ant and Slow-Mo is still, you could call it good, but it's not as good as last year. Ant you could call good because it's much better than he's ever done before. Both of them are in the 2-to-1 ratio, Sure. Which is good. It's good for a non-point guard. Unfortunately, Slow-Mo is your backup point guard, and Ant is, your de facto playmaker a lot of the time. But still, I would argue Ant's assist to turnover ratio, given the load he carries, is very good.
I want to take our first break here. Then we'll move on to your next X factor, which is Ant reacclimating to his near MVP caliber level of play. We always, on these midweek shows with Britt, these episodes are brought to you by Falling Knife Brewing Company. It's Wednesday as we're recording this now. Next Wolves game is Thursday on the road in Dallas, as always. Falling Knife is an option for you to go watch those games with other Wolves fans on their projector screens, TVs, with the sound on, which we love and think is cool that they do there too. But also, this is, the time of year where you're looking for stocking stuffers, random little thing, X, Y, and Z. I mean, I know that's been a random gift I've got my brother, is like a craft beer from some brewery around. And I think this is a brewery that, listeners, is invested in the Wolves, invested in this show. So we would just love it to be the place that if you are looking to, pick up a 6-pack of craft beer for the holidays or give away as a gift or dinners or whatever it might be, we always want you to keep Falling Knife on the mind, and that they're located in Northeast Minneapolis. Many of you have been there for our live shows and whatnot, but check them out this holiday season to go watch a game for a happy hour with your, work or friends, and then think about grabbing some stuff to go for a holiday gift. All right, Britt, I want to move into Ant, and we kind of talked about him before. He's related to the playmaking stuff. Obviously, in that New Orleans game, the playmaking doesn't look like as much of an issue if Ant is out there. A bunch of things don't look like as much of an issue if Ant is out there, because he has played at an all-NBA level this season when he's been healthy. So your X factor is getting back to that, which I think probably is the assumption will happen.
Easier said than done. See, that's the thing that why it's an X factor. I mean, because otherwise it would be easy to say, yeah, we'll just, turn Ant back on. But chemistry, synergy, whatever you want to call it, is not a snap your fingers thing. Sure. And since Ant has been down, Cat has stepped up and really put more of himself into this team in some very meaningful ways that have to be accounted for to some extent. I do think that Ant had struck a really fine and difficult balance between being an alpha scorer and being somebody who keeps all his teammates happy. I can't count the number of times he hit wide open teammates who were struggling and hit them so well with passes and rhythm that they went up and buried a shot. McDaniels at one game, but Shake Milton a couple of times, a couple of times. He is an all-opportunity passer when he is on his game. And I think when he feels like he is in a rhythm, everybody else benefits. When he is not in a rhythm, I see him trying to establish a good shot selection that works for him internally. I think one of the ways that Ant still needs to grow is that shot selection is his priority before playmaking is his priority. He needs to feel comfortable in order to be at his best as a playmaker. Right. And so I think coming back from injury, and he said he was scared the first time he came back, and then he re-injured it the second time he came back, or, after he came back. So you get a sense that it is a painful thing. And we know Ant has a history of kind of playing a love-hate relationship with things that are wrong with his body. Sometimes he pays it no mind, plays anyway. Other times it encroaches upon the way he plays. On top of that, you have greater competition. You have a need for him to be a playmaker as much as a scorer right now for all the reasons we just enumerated. And so, and on defense, I should mention, his defense was so good before he got hurt. I'm just terrified that it's going to go away because, because he's 22 and because he's been out for a while and because he's got other things he's worried about and because the team is already established as a great team right now and all kinds of reasons. But I don't think it's a gimme that we are going to get the Ant we saw in the first 3 weeks of the season. I think if we do, that is a huge boost for this team. It solves the playmaking and to a great degree. It actually really helps the defense because he's playing so much better defense than he ever has before. And it helps the locker room, Ant's mood, the ability, you know, it's been the Rudy and Cat show since Ant's been down. Let's face it. Both of those guys have done their performative locker room stuff, you know, in his absence. But Ant owns the locker room when Ant is on the move, and everybody else kind of follows his lead. And I would imagine that's just the way guys like Naz Reid and Jaden McDaniels like it, you know?
I'm a little bit, just like judging off of how you're saying it, believing it will come back a little bit more than you are. I'm not saying it's a 100% thing, but whatever, if we're assigning percentages, maybe I believe in it a little bit more than you. But the thing I've really been thinking about since that New Orleans game, which is relevant to this conversation, is I think it is critical that Ant gets back to that, because this team, as currently constructed to be a winning team, a top team in the Western Conference, I think needs to dominate the Anthony Edwards minutes. It needs to look like the LeBron on-off splits, the Jokic on-off splits, or close to it, because we've been using like the term meat on the bone, right? After Finch said that like a month ago. I'm not sure there's a lot of meat on the bone in the non-Ant minutes left. I don't offensively. I mean, this team can be good defensively when Ant is off the floor, but that Pelicans game illuminated to me in a full 48 spread there that I don't think that this team has a lot or enough juice, and might, until they make a roster change or something like that, I'm just not sure it's going to be a good even average offensive level of play. I looked it up. They are, with Ant off the floor, offensive rating wise, like playing at the level of a bottom 5 offense in the league. And they're overall, I mean, with Ant, they're about a top like 10th level offense overall. They're about an average offense on the year. And I just don't know. I mean, it can be better than 26th where it's at for that level, but I don't think there's a lot more juice there, because we saw it in the Pelicans game. Like, there's not a lot of shooting on this team surrounding Cat when Ant is off the floor. So that's going to kind of become the book, I would assume, on guarding this team when Ant misses games or is off the floor, is bringing those doubles against Cat, loading up against Cat if he's at the top of the floor trying to drive, which then is demanding Carl to be a playmaker. And there isn't movement shooters on this team. There isn't high level catch and shoot players on this team, again, particularly when Ant is off the floor. So I say that to mean I think Ant needs to get back to that all NBA caliber of play, because this is an average to below average offensive team. And they need, in those 34 or 5 minutes a night that Ant's on the floor, to be a dominant offensive team, because I think those 14, 15 minutes a night when Ant is off the floor, this team's probably going to be noticeably below average, just given the other players that are on the floor that, you know, really kind of need Ant to be empowered, kind of like you said, by finding them their rhythm. I don't think there's a path to a ton of rhythm to the offense without Ant.
I would push back on that some.
Please, because I believe this.
Okay. The offensive numbers for Jaden McDaniels last year were remarkably good. I mean, I was so surprised when I did my Finch interview prep, just thinking about different guys on the team and how they fit in. And this season, Jaden McDaniels' contribution has been to boost the offense. It's a really kind of remarkable stat. The sample size, obviously, he's played like 10 games.
Sure.
But it is kind of a interesting carryover from last year in some respects. Among all 10 rotation players, if you count both Brown Jr. and Shake as your 9-10, okay. When Jaden McDaniels is on the floor, the Wolves have the highest offensive rating among all 10 rotation players. And when Jaden McDaniels is on the floor, they have the highest defensive In other words, the most porous defense.
Mm.
It's obviously a somewhat of a factor that the bench seems to depress scoring in both sides of the ball, so on and so forth. But what I have also noticed is that McDaniels has a feisty pride in getting his own. And if he sees opportunities to get his own, I mean, it was ridiculous the other night. He had 8 shots in like 12 minutes, totally rusty. But by the end of the game, I mean, he pumped in a couple of threes to keep the team in the game, in the fourth quarter. I think that the future for Jaden McDaniels on offense is going to be coming faster at us than we originally thought. And some of that is because there's a void there. So that's my one argument for that. The other
can I respond to that first
before
we get into it?
Yeah.
Because for sure, I think that is the best answer. I think that's a really good point to bring up there. That is a player who's looking for more offensive bandwidth that we believe can do more offensively. I'm thinking about it like more technically, and I believe like picturing where that offense comes from Jaden. It's easier for me to picture with Ant again on the floor,
right?
In a more, I think Jaden's best offense comes from cutting, right? And
which he and Cat have done that really well.
Okay, but so this is interesting. Like, paint it out for me. Ant's not on the floor. Where does Jaden get his cutting buckets from? You mentioned the
strong side baseline cut with Cat in the slot.
Okay, see, I agree with that. That is what I think the biggest thing that needs to shift with the no Ant. You're running your offense through Cat offense, right? I don't think the post ups that are going to get doubled are the answer, right? And that was the answer they looked for over and over.
And part of that is because Cat has a tendency. I was going to write this today, and I ran out of room or didn't think of it, whatever, some reason. But essentially, Cat has a good kind of vanity, which is that whenever somebody is saying he's doing one thing well and therefore should stop doing the other thing that much, he wants to prove that the other thing he does really well too. So that right now everybody's clamoring for Cat to shoot threes for obvious reasons. The dude is over 40% again, and he's over 50% in the last 10 games or so. He's just been raining buckets. And yet, he continually drove into like the beef of the Pelicans over and over again, probably thinking that if they're going to call fouls on everybody and his brother at one end, he might get a whistle or two at the other end. But at the end of the day, I think that Cat is a very multidimensional player. He just has to have a better sense of when he can hammer somebody on a specific thing. Mm-hmm. He likes to mix it up within the course of a game, and whether the defense has adjusted or not, Sure. I mean, if he's 3 for 4 in the first half, that doesn't mean he's going to shoot 5 more in the second half. In fact, it might mean that he doesn't,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, right. And so I feel like another wrinkle to this is that Cat right now his assist to turnover ratio is a little bit funky. And it's partly because of where he's playing, and partly because of the fact that, I mean, the other night he did like this reach around bounce pass to Jaden McDaniels that was geometrically impossible to complete, and you get stuff like that. And then you go, okay, this is Cat, trying to be more than he is. But I do think that if people cut baseline and Cat has the ball at the top of the key anywhere on the floor, he will try to find that guy. Mm-hmm. And I think it's worthwhile. It will be in the scouting report if it keeps up. And Jaden McDaniels is a good candidate for that. And I would hope that right now Chris Finch is working on Cat to McDaniels cuts because I think that is a really good non-ant solution.
Yeah, I kind of get why it went the way it did against the Pelicans. Like, I don't really blame Carl for that. I mean, they were
he was hot in the first half, but then
exactly
they ganged him.
Yeah, well, that's the thing is, like, it worked so well in the first half that I think that's why Finch had them keep going back to it in the second half, the post ups and letting Carl
2 points, 1 rebound.
Yeah, in the second half, exactly. It was, it turned out to not be the best offensive path, but again, kind of our previous point.
Right.
What was the other offense? What else were you going to do there? It had to go through Carl. Now, I think maybe with hindsight, Finch would say maybe we could have done that by running a little bit more pick and pop, having him in the delay, play as the trail big, put Rudy in the dunker, whatever. There's different ways to do that. I just think it's going to be hard, and this isn't totally Carl's fault, but with the surrounding personnel, I think this team is going to struggle to be able to beat Carl doubles in the post this season, particularly when Ant is off the floor. I think you need both cutters and spacers or movement shooters to be able to. I was rewatching it last night. I was thinking that you need players that can hunt space, right? That's what you need when your big is being doubled in the post. And you
know who the best on the roster is at doing that?
Ant?
Mike Conley.
Oh, Mike Conley. Yeah, sure.
I mean, and so
yeah,
and so the other thing that has to happen is that Conley has to be, I mean, it's almost like, you have a certain amount of water in a day, and you don't want a big glass right away necessarily. You want to make sure that the times when you're thirsty, you get to have that water. And I don't want to yo-yo Mike Conley in and out of the lineup, but I would like to see a little bit more surgical rotations. I would not want to see, and the 15 minutes at the end of one game about a couple weeks ago, that was an aberration. But what I would like to see are a little bit more 5 and 6 minute stints, and maybe one more rotation as a result to get that 30 minutes. Maybe 5 rotations of 5 or 6 minutes, because I think that he really works with any personnel you put out there, with the possible exception of J-Mac, which is, just really a terrible, very, very small.
Kind of irrelevant. Yeah.
Very small. And so, but I think that if you put him out there with Cat, for example, that is where you get that, that outlet. I would like to see Rudy and Conley have this down with science. Cat has always been a terribly timed screener. If they could figure out how to work that high pick and roll screen where Conley steps back on that 3, and then do the thing where Cat and Wiggins used to do, where it looked like Conley was stepping back for a 3, but meanwhile, Cat slides over also on the arc and gets the pass.
Right.
I mean, I think there are ways. You got a couple of 40% shooters, pretty reliably 40% 3-point shooters. And if you're not going to have Ant on the court, use them.
Right. Well, and again, this is oversimplification, but it's kind of what you're saying too. Like, you just need to invert the offense, and rather than having Cat on the block and Rudy in the dunker, bring them up, run that horns, that V action that they run. That seems like the better thing to go to, because it taps more into Towns and Conley's 3-point shooting rather than just their passing. Whereas that's more so the case when it is, Carl on the block and Rudy in the opposite side dunker.
Yeah, and that won't happen on Thursday, probably. They will bully ball Dallas. They have Lively, 7'1" rookie. And then I think they step down to Grant Williams at 6'6". I mean, they got Holmes, who's 6'9". But I expect them tomorrow night to bully ball it more. And
it's always a balance, right?
yeah,
It's more we're talking about the times in which the offense is stalling out, and we're specifically talking about the times when Ant can't bail you out because he's not in the game.
Right.
What can we run then? And that's what I think the Pelicans game was, a really good learning lesson to be like, yeah, we do need to add more to our bag there to solve that element of the game. All right, Brett, let's move over to your third factor of, surviving or sustaining this really difficult stretch in the schedule. And you wrote, can the awe-inspiring defense hold up? And I want to get to that, but I think this is somewhat related to what we were just talking about before, and fuses into this here as well. I'm curious your thought on this. The three teams who probably exceeded expectations most this season, or I don't know, are close to, are Minnesota, Orlando, and I guess you could say OKC there too, but Houston at least this fits my narrative. Narrative also, a little bit better.
Yeah, huge defensive improvements, all three.
Well, they're the top three defenses in the NBA right now, and they're all below average, or average to below like 15th or lower in offense on the season, and that's like, you need that elite defense to be able to be a team that has aspirations of, making a run in the playoffs, but you're also you also need a probably above average offense, which none of those three teams have, which raises, red flags to some extent about the sustainability of, if we're just talking about Houston and Orlando, we would hone in on that, just kind of looking at the offensive personnel and even asking yourself, how much better can this get? The Wolves are a little bit different because I think we can picture
this. You got Ant and Cat.
Exactly.
There's
right. Like
no way 10. Houston or Orlando can match that.
Yeah. So it's like, I guess the main takeaway is for Houston, Orlando, and Minnesota to sustain or get better or improve their odds of becoming a contender or a playoff team that can make a run, is that offense does need to get better. And conversely, if it doesn't, you're not going anywhere. Like all three, Minnesota included, right? I really, I looked it up. I was like, all right, what teams have been the best teams that have been below average offenses the last few years
that have made it past the first round?
No, just the best, the best teams who had below average offenses. Last year, it was the Pelicans. And they were 6th in defense and 18th on offense, and they lost in the play-in tournament. Didn't even make the playoffs. The year before that, the best team with a below average offense was the Toronto Raptors. They were 16th on offense, 10th on defense. They lost in the first round. And the year before that, it was the Lakers in 2020-21. They were 22nd on offense during the regular season and 2nd in defense. And they also lost in the first round. It isn't to say that you can't be a below average offensive team and win a playoff series or advance to, the finals. Actually, the Lakers, the bubble year, the year before that, I would assume, I didn't go back that far, but they might be the most recent example of real success in that. But I just think this is something to keep on our mind. It's why we're talking about, the offense with Ant on the floor versus off the floor, and how that is detracting from the overall, because they are a top 10 offense when Ant's on the floor. What can you get to, buoy that? So we're, in a month or two from now, we're like, yeah, the Wolves are 9th in offense and 2nd in defense, right? That should be the goal of where this team is going. And I do feel more confident in the Wolves being able to do that than Orlando and Houston. Respect to them, I probably need to watch more of them, but looking at the rosters, and it seems that the Wolves would be the most likely to be able to do this. So I know this is, can the awe-inspiring defense sustain segment of the show, but the awe-inspiring defense also needs help from the offense as well. Even if it stays really good, the offense needs to get better.
Here's an interesting point, and this is something I'm going to write about sometime, and I toyed with it for a while. and I'm actually not even sure it still holds, but it was holding when I looked at it a week or so ago. The defense does not help the offense as much as it used to. Points off turnovers, I think they're, they may be decently high, but they're for the steals and blocks and deflections, and the Wolves they're not getting to loose balls. They're not boxing out. They're not doing the fundamental hustle things at even a league average. They are also not contesting shots at a really high rate. What they are doing is stifling people with a fairly conservative, albeit roaming system that doesn't take chances that much, but constantly thwarts good shots. Thwarting good shots is wonderful, and it lowers a team's offensive rating, but it also does not turn teams over in a manner that enables you to go on these great runs. Think about even last year, the Wolves would go on these little high-spirited, 12-2 runs based on their defense. Their defense now is suffocating people, but they're not, electrocuting people.
That was the Pat Bev Vando team, right? Yeah, they were second in turnovers generated.
Points off turnovers, right?
Yeah, turnovers generated, points off turnovers. That was a big part of that team's defensive identity. We've been over a million different times. That was a much more aggressive defensive scheme, but that scheme inspired more transition offense defensively. Obviously, it's not the right defensive scheme to be running when you have Rudy Gobert.
This is not a risk-taking defense.
Yes.
And it's very obvious if you watch them that it's not a risk-taking defense.
And this is the best defense. This is how they should be playing defense. Absolutely. Exactly. We're just doing the distinction.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, what I'm saying, though, is the offense is on its own if you're going to play defense this way.
Yeah.
You're not going to be sprinting out, getting a lot of transition buckets. And, you're not going to be it just feels like the whole defense into offense thing is less. It's more like you kill the other team's offense, but you don't ignite your own offense as a result as much.
Sure.
And you're getting rebounds, you're bringing it up there. I think they're like 21st in pace or something. That fly around capability. You can see the fly around in the structure, a very structured defense where everybody kind of knows their assignment. There's good switching. They know how to switch better than ever before, I think, to some extent. They are playing zone with a discipline that I think is better than they've ever had before. And their basic package of, go out and retreat and have switch partners and do your thing.
Pursue,
is done really, really well. But it is not a point generator. It is a point deflator for the other team. My point on the X factor is that, and this part, I give you credit for this because you inspired this from our last pod where we were talking about the front line of Cat, Nas, and Slow-Mo.
Yeah.
And you said they have gone downhill on defense. They started really well, but they are not doing as well. And I argued against it because my eye test, a little bit influenced by memory, didn't quite agree with your harsh assessment of it. Well, the numbers are worse. The numbers are, I just took 2 11-game segments because they played 22, okay?
Sure.
The front court of Cat, Nas, and Slow-Mo in the first 11 games, when they were on the court, gave up 92 points per 100 possessions. The second 11 games, they gave up 111.
Yeah.
That is a 19-point swing. 19 points worse in the second half of the season to date doing that. And some of that is teams have started to figure them out a little bit more. Some of that is they are slow. And some of that is, I think, Jaden's hurt, Ant's hurt, and it's the second unit. So you got not in the second unit now. Na's with the first unit. Jaden is not on the court. So you're losing some really cool perimeter defenders or wing defenders that would help you out a lot more. So there is a factor there. But the bottom line is, if that happens, it's hard to have an elite defense if your second unit is porous.
This is maybe arguing against my own point, but at the same time, if you would have told me before the season started that the Wolves would have a 111 defensive rating when Kat and Naz and Kyle are on the floor, I'd be like, sign me up for that. You know, I don't think we're saying this to assess that three-man defensive pairing, an important three-man defensive pairing for this team, as a failure at all this year. I mean, they B+ or whatever. A- maybe, but it is not the weapon in which it was turning out to be in the first 11 games of the season.
Well, and the offense is also flipped. I mean, they were a lot better on offense. They were like, I think their net rating was plus 17.5 in the first 11 games, and it's -7 or something.
Well, and a player who plays next to those three players a ton is Shake Milton.
Right.
And teams are not guarding Shake Milton on the perimeter, and they're now not guarding Kyle Anderson as well. So it makes sense that that team has gotten that group.
And Naz is occasionally, you know, it's kind of like air in the gas line, you know, every now and then, you know, Naz is puts down the throttle and doesn't go anywhere, you know? So
can I ask you, there's a little tangent off of this. I know we're talking about defense, but like I keep, whenever I get in the stretches of a game or a handful of games, I'm like, man, they need more offensive juice. What I go to in my head all the time is Naz, right? And particularly off of those second units.
Right.
What I haven't figured out, I'm curious of your perspective, is how, if you're Finch and you're like, all right, I know we want to get more offense out of Naz because we need that in our second unit. How would you go about trying to generate that?
That's one of my biggest arguments for J-Mac.
Yeah.
Because those guys are liquid. I mean, they are not static. And both of them, they're the two quickest decision makers on the entire team.
Sure. And
so they're thinking very quickly in sync. I mean, their pick and roll explodes. And if you have that as a weapon, at the same time, you have a deliberator like Slow-Mo on the floor, and you have a guy like Cat who can be, you know, a flare. You can do some actions there. And, you know, first of all, Naz and J-Mac can get up the court and test transition. Both of them have enough sense, if it's not absolutely there, to pull back, but also immediately get into a good delayed half-court action. I think Cat would love to play more with J-Mac, simply because he delivers the ball in a way that speeds you up in a positive way, and Cat occasionally waits too long to see if the double's coming, waits too long, and all of a sudden the three is not as open as it was before. I think Cat could benefit from an accelerator on his own checklist, and I think that J-Mac naturally provides that. So I'd be curious to see it anyway, just to see what happens.
But maybe we need to put a line through that, because that just might not happen. It doesn't seem like when Ant is back that Jordan McLaughlin is going to play. He played in the last game. He checked in with like 5 minutes left in the third quarter. That is a player who is, even when you were missing one of your top guys in Ant, you had ruled out of your rotation for that game.
See, I'm not convinced. I'm not convinced, because I do think.
But I'm not talking about you, man. I'm talking about Finch. I'm trying to think about it through that lens. Are you convinced that?
Yes, I'm not convinced, but I'm a lot more leaning in the direction that Finch understands that J-Mac needs to play. What were the first words out of his mouth in the press conference after New Orleans? J-Mac had a good game. J-Mac had a good game.
Yeah. Okay, I did see that.
You know? And so
maybe. Okay, so maybe. Okay, we talked about that. That is a potential answer to it. But again,
otherwise, what is it? Who's the point guard?
Nickeil and Naz. I think it's the same idea, but it's Nickeil and Naz. I'm serious. I don't hate that.
And I will tell you right now, if Nickeil Alexander-Walker and Naz are on the court as a two-player tandem, nobody in their right mind thinks you're going to get more offense out of that than you are the J-Mac Naz tandem. No. I mean, it's ridiculous. On defense, yeah, you give up some. And it's going to hurt because of what we just got through saying about the porous front court. But I think if you're looking to goose the offense and you don't want to play Ant a tremendous amount of minutes or Conley a tremendous amount of minutes, you have to start using J-Mac.
And I'm agreeing with you. I would do that.
I know you have no faith in Finch making the right decision.
Well, I don't know. I mean, he would. If he finds a different right decision, I'm guessing.
Right, and if he does, hats off.
Yeah.
I think if it's Shake Milton, I mean, they put $10 million down on Shake Milton for 2 years.
Five. Well, next year's not guaranteed. I mean,
okay.
I don't think I don't know. I mean, things would need to change for him to be on the team here.
He is being paid more now than Troy Brown and Nah combined, or about the same amount. Very close.
Shake 5, Nickeil 4.5, Troy 4.
Okay. Well,
they're all there's no pecking order difference in that. I was not suggesting that Shake is the answer there too. I think again, if it's Dane and Britt, we're doing things. We're like, yeah, play J-Mac, run spread pick and roll with Naz. I'm going. If someone tells me then I can't have that, then what are my other alternatives here to juice the offense or goose the offense, as you said?
Right.
And now I'm moving down into the next question is Nickeil or Shake there. And I would prefer to play Nickeil than Shake at this time. And the way in which I would prefer to do that is to run more pick and roll with Naz in more of a spread concept, because I just think that group doesn't have enough offensive juice to just play within the flow, which often leads to an isolation type situation. That group just doesn't have a lot of isolation personnel out of it, or puts Naz in harder isolation situations. I think spreading the floor with that second group, playing more decisively, playing in more high quad pick and roll, maybe gets you more of that offensive juice, which again, yes, J-Mac, I think would do that as well. But can Nickeil do that? Because he's going to give you better defense. And he's probably going to give you better shooting.
What about going small with Naz at the 5, Slow-Mo at the 4, Nickeil at the 3, or Troy Brown Jr. at the 3, your choice. The other one at the 2. Mm-hmm. And then
you're going to say J-Mac again?
Well, I could say J-Mac, or I could say,
Shake.
It could be Shake. But I think what I'm saying is you have a lot of switchable wings. That's why I hesitate on J-Mac. He's less switchable. Mm-hmm. Although he is surprisingly feisty when he's guarding post-ups. I've always admired him for that. And for all I know, is as good as,
he gets into that little fire hydrant mode, right? Where you it's hard to move it.
And he loves to leap forward and, like a defender on, in a defensive back, on a pass.
Yeah.
He's great at the leaping deflection. So anyway,
I guess we're just reading the tea leaves differently about Jordan McLaughlin's.
Yeah, we are. And, we'll see who's right. I think that, put it this way. If one way doesn't work, the other way will be tried.
Yeah.
Because they do need to do something.
Yeah.
And so, and also, again, we get back to, I think it's less of an issue right away, because Dallas has, even though Dallas, I looked this up, have the 12th best defense over the last 7 games, they are 23rd overall. Mm-hmm. And so they're not a good defensive team. And Luka, it's still the Luka show, and even more so if Kyrie's heel is still bothering him. And you got to contend with Dante Exum, who had a fabulous game the other night. and they
He's
beat
been
the
playing
Lakers.
well. I watched another one of their games before
Oh,
too.
Luka is.
Yeah.
I mean, he's still a flaming jerk with the refs, but the guy really does know how to pick apart.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you can read his mind along with him and still not stop it. You know,
Right.
uh,
I want let's actually talk about Dallas and Indiana. Those are the next two games
yeah,
here.
two tremendous offensive teams.
Exactly, and I think again maybe this fuses well into our can the defense, the awe-inspiring defense hold up here, and they're different, right? Dallas and Indiana are different in how they're high-level offenses. They both play that
but they are both
heliocentric.
pick and roll.
Yeah. And it's just, I mean, I think the distinction is the pace in which Indiana plays with versus Dallas. I was just listening to the Dallas broadcast, which is actually great, by the way. I
agree. I agree. They're a good league pass crew.
Yes. Dallas is playing a little bit faster, and I'm curious if that is going to be a tactic against this Wolves defense in general. Obviously, you know, it makes sense to try to get the Wolves defense out of the half court as much as possible. But almost like the Pelicans game felt like the Pels were almost daring the Wolves to play at a faster pace with them, which subtracts a little bit from the defense. Obviously, Rudy is in foul trouble. It's just a weird defensive game.
Right.
I don't know. It would be awesome if the Wolves can play with a little bit more pace while sustaining the half court defense. The question is like, is that even a realistic, is that even something that can happen, you know? And I think Dallas and Indiana will both, you know, try and push the Wolves or test that out of the Wolves and try and play them faster.
I think that is another area where Jaden over Nah. I think Jaden can play in transition both ways, defending in transition and running in transition. I just think he's taller for one thing, which gives him, there's a difference between 6'9" and 6'5", and what you can do in transition as a result. And I think that, you know, it remains to see how rusty he is. He looked a lot better in the second half than he did in the first, and maybe that's all it takes. But I think there's that. I also think that Halliburton and Doncic are both really great playmakers, but are so different, you know.
Totally.
I mean, Luka wants to get to the line. He doesn't care about turnovers that much. He's a bull in a china shop a lot. And Halliburton is more like a avant-garde painter or something. He's just going down the court and, next he's doing this and doing that. And it feels spontaneous even when it isn't, because he plays with flair. And that's infectious. That team obviously loves playing with him right now, and he's in a zone. I mean, this will not continue. You do not have multiple double-digit assist games with no turnovers on a regular basis, while you're getting 25 to 30 points a night. I mean, I think that he will be an all-star caliber player, but I also think that when they chart the sine wave of his season, he's at a peak right now. And if he hits it for the rest of the season, it won't be as frequently as he is now. But anyway, my point about the defense was Rudy Gobert is a perfectionist, and he has been reveling in this first 6 weeks, or the 6-week stretch that the Wolves got through, because the defense was pretty perfect. And a lot of it was because he was making the right decisions. Everybody was in sync around him. But as the standard or the bar, whatever you want to call it, has risen, I think his willingness to accept less than that is going to be tighter. And I don't think it's a good thing. I think that Rudy's competitiveness on defense, he's back. He knows he's back. He knows he's shut everybody up who ripped them last year, and he doesn't want that to stop. And if his teammates or some of the people that are making it stop, I think he's going to let them know about it. And I worry about his patience because, it's the way we started this conversation. We are spoiled by the caliber of play the Wolves have demonstrated in these first 22 games, first 21 games. Mm-hmm. I think Rudy Gobert is spoiled by what he has gotten from his teammates and what he has been able to deliver. And I think that, in that New Orleans game, and granted, a lot of it was that he knows how important he is, and he was shelved with foul trouble both halves. But he was, Gobert's testimonials to the ref are in their own way as ineffective as Cat's, back in Cat's prime for that kind of stuff. And it doesn't help. And when Gobert wants a replay, 90% of the time he is committed the foul. And he just needs to understand that. And it just, I was negative on Gobert a lot of last season and certainly in the beginning of this season. And he shut me up, and he was right. I was wrong. And I don't want this to be kind of like a resurrection of sour grapes. I'm just pointing out that I believe what makes him great also could make him a little bit corrosive.
Yeah, no, I think you articulated the take well, and like you said, the thing that strikes home is that we've all been spoiled by how well this has worked, and how and where do you react to that when things are when you're no longer like basking in the spoils, right? That's why, and we've been saying this for weeks, I've loved Finch's, and just from talking to the players too, like Finch, when they watch film, they'll win a game by 25 points and it's 20 clips of like, hey, what do we not do here? There has been that mentality the whole time. I think I'm not as far on that concern spectrum as you are. And I think a lot of it has to do with Jaden coming back because this team has been the number one defense through 22 games, and Jaden's missed half of those games. And he's the second best defensive player on the team. Pretty simplistic math, but I think we can figure that out too, because, we're talking about we've talked in this episode about the no Ant minutes, what that does for the offense. We've talked in previous episodes about what no Rudy does for the defense. Like, Jaden's going to help all that. Both of those equations, as you articulated before. I think he'll help this, and he'll help sustain the defense some too. But
I think he's going to be a more positive impact on offense than he is on defense. And a lot of that, I think, is a tribute to Nah. I think Nah has played really, really well as a wing stopper. And so we have not missed Jaden McDaniels' defense. They've retained the number one defense in the NBA with McDaniels out. I don't know how much better it can get, whereas I know how much better the offense can get with Jaden on the court. But
he's better at defense than he is at offense. So there's like veracity.
Yes, I think that I want to see.
But think about Jaden as like the hooper. Like, I know we know all those numbers of last year, right? Like, and I know we like to think that Jaden has this deeper bag that we haven't seen in all that much. And I believe that. I really do. But like, I've always questioned if he's a 40% 3-point shooter. And I wonder if the elite numbers at the basket are because of the focus that Rudy and Ant and Cat are all generating. I think we're like skipping the eye test to suggest that Jaden's offensive impact right now can be even close to his defensive impact. Like,
okay. And where I'm coming on this, I think I am still worried about his temper. I am still worried about his attitude. I think that there was a point in time where his feistiness was in a place that made him a much better defender. I think as the league has figured out the unique way he guards people and the fact that he guards some of the cleverest scorers in the NBA, I think that he is provoked more than ever before. And I don't think he has solved that for himself. And as a result, I think that he gets in foul trouble, but he also, you see, I mean, I saw it against the Wolves a couple of times where Jaden is just like mixing it up with somebody on the side off the play. It wasn't a Klay Thompson situation, but it's like, hey, you know, don't fuck with me kind of thing. That is it good to have that? Yeah, to some extent. But at what point does it become not good?
But I think the question is, what should we presume? Should we presume that is a good thing, or should we presume it is a bad thing? It's easy to go off of punching the wall and that being a thing, or the time.
Yeah, I'm not talking about that. I am talking about the idea that if Jaden gets a couple of ticky-tack fouls, he doesn't go and complain to the refs and make a spectacle of himself the way Cat does, or Gobert recently has done.
Presses those emotions. Yeah.
What he does is he gives somebody a good shove when he thinks that the ref isn't watching. And sometimes the ref is watching.
Yeah.
And even if the ref isn't watching, that brings out the beast in the guy he's guarding, and maybe a good way, maybe it isn't. But
yeah,
it's
I kind of love it. I still kind of love it.
I
recognize the risk, but I kind of love it.
Well, and so far, I mean, I've talked about Ant, Rudy, and Jaden in non-basketball ways, in attitudinal ways. And you thought all three of those are, I would imagine, too psychoanalytic. And I would cop to that. I will cop to the idea that
I'm not dismissing them. I'm not.
No,
I don't disagree.
I just think that there is a way to look at the game. Mm-hmm. Sometimes I look at it in a way that goes overboard, and this may be the case, but there is something about this team had an attitude in equilibrium when they were rolling. And just as it's a make or miss league, it's a in sync, not sync, there is that attitudinal equilibrium is hard to sustain. I think Finch is excellent at it. One of the reasons I like Finch as a coach so much is because I think he pays attention to this stuff, and I think he does a good job with it. But I also think that
there's a fragility to that. I'm with that. I hear that. Like I'm not taking that away. And
no,
we could just list off, Rudy's demeanor vacillating over the course of last season.
Right.
Jaden, obviously, we could point to a handful of different things too. I don't know. I think the hope is that with another year and with a year of just growth and maturity,
right,
that those things, it's not like that they will never be problems,
right,
but maybe less frequently can be. So I guess where I'm just at is I'm not presuming those things becoming issues. I'm acknowledging that they could.
Right. And I am thinking that having a career high foul rate in your fourth year when you are notoriously foul prone is a red flag. And I think that he's got to find a way to cut it out and still be effective.
No, I said this earlier when we were talking about the Pelicans game specifically, and it's like Rudy and Nikhil got in foul trouble, and I'm just willing to give those two more grace in that game because I haven't seen it be a chronic problem.
Right.
But people often think this is just like piling on Karl, but obviously that has been a chronic problem throughout his career that he has had.
Cat has committed 17 fouls in the 3 New Orleans games.
Yeah, that's crazy.
6 twice, 5 once.
Wow. And like Jaden, I know the Cat part of that one is just like so overloaded and toxic, and it feels like, I don't know, like piling on or something. I just like with the Cat part, I'm like, yes, fouling is an issue. It's been an issue for 9 years. I don't know how I would go about trying to make that change. I'm just kind of like, it is what it is. The Jaden one, is more interesting to me in that the track record is shorter, right? I think he has a different personality than Carl, or mentality to this. And I'm curious if it could change because of that. But at the same time, I put him in the chronic fouler category with Carl, and not the one that Nikhil and Rudy are in there. So and I think I'm acknowledging it too.
Jaden is in the trenches. He likes the trenches. And the difference between Jaden and Gobert is that people come to Gobert. Jaden most of the time has to come to the guy he is guarding because he's a wing stopper. And most of the time that guy is going to be working screens. He's going to be working actions where he's going to be, you're going to have to dodge bodies. And sometimes he's going to try to bull you. And if he gets a head of steam up, he will be able to bull you. So there's all kinds of reasons why Jaden has to collapse distance. At the same time, he is not a smothering defensive player that way. He's an appendage guy. I've said this a lot. But at the end of the day, it's a unique way of playing that the book is out on Jaden. He's got a hot temper, and he is really, really effective if you let him tag along with you. You've got to get into him, and you've got to throw him off his game psychologically, if you can, by drawing ticky-tack fouls and by, running him into enough screens and just doing your thing where,
which Luka, I mean, again, to the Thursday Luka matchup, that's just how Luka plays against everyone. It'll be a good test.
Yeah. And I hope Nah gets a lot of those minutes. I think it should be a tag team. And for that matter, Slow-Mo has turned out to be, for all the times I've ripped him for his shooting this year and his playmaking is down, the dude is guarding wings really, really well. Guys you would not think he can stay with. He's so long, and he sidles in a way that is incredibly economic movement,
it has to be given the foot speed, right? Like if it's working, it has to be.
Yeah. But he's still covering ground.
Yeah. No, it's it will be an interesting test for this defense here. The Dallas and Indiana, the next two games. I think then it's Miami, and then it's Philadelphia, who's number 3 in offense. I think Dallas, Indiana, and Philadelphia are the top 3 offenses right now. So yeah, a great test for technical defense, for attitudinal defense. We'll see,
and for offense to keep pace.
Yeah, no, I think this was. I'm glad to have had the New Orleans game personally to kind of recalibrate my thinking not only thinking now here comes the hard part, but what is the hard part going to require out of this team? And they're probably going to check some boxes and not check some boxes. And we're going to track that. Do you want to,
I would not be disenchanted with an 8-8 stretch. Right now they're 0-1. So an 8-7 from here on out. That would give them a record of 25-12. That's a 55 win pace with the biggest part of their schedule, the hardest part of their schedule behind them.
I just think 16 is too big to think about. I'm thinking about it in 5.
I know. It is. It's enormous. It's a month. It is a month of nothing but really good teams.
It's too big, and some of the quality of those teams can change and evolve just given time, or their own injuries, or something can happen to the Wolves.
Yeah, no Kyrie tomorrow night.
Exactly. Yeah. So I don't know. I kind of decided.
Which to be honest with you, I'm not sure is worse. Because Dallas has been playing really well without him.
Yeah, no, Exum. That was, he's kind of stepped in there. Tim Hardaway. I watched that Lakers Mavs game last night too, and man, watching Luka just
having fun
down Taurean Prince too. How angry did Taurean Prince just look at the end of the game of just frustration of this dude just scoring on me over and over again, and I'm trying as hard as I can. Do you want to? Anything with the column? Do you want to plug what this and one element it is?
Yeah, if people are interested, this is 2 things. MinPost is trying to figure out a way to now the Wolves are hot. I think they want to basically use that allure. In fact, I write about them. So there's that aspect of it. There's also the aspect that we've gone back and forth on length. Some they have this idea that they want to keep my columns to a certain length, as not just mine but everybody's, and there have been disagreements about that, but there's not much I'm going to do about it, except that this is a way. They wanted to have a newsletter, and they said, we can get your column out a little earlier to other people, but they can also get it right in their mailbox, et cetera, et cetera. And I said, and they said, what do you want to call it? And I said, I want to call it N1, and I want to offer some exclusive content, which just basically gives me a chance to write about stuff that I want to write about anyway, that I don't have the quote unquote room for. So this first one I did, I think there's like 600 words a copy that won't be in Min Post. But if you do the N1 newsletter, you'll get a little bit of my thoughts on Dallas and on the end of the rotation, and my argument to some extent for J-Mac over somebody like Shake Milton.
And that is I think you tweeted out that link, right? Like if it's just
I think it's out there. And if you go to Min Post, or I bet you if you go to the column, which will be out tomorrow, there'll be a link for it.
Cool. Well, we'll keep tracking that. It's always good to get more Britt Robson writing. I thought you did even just the column itself felt like two separate sort of meaty good things in the X Factor parts we went through, but Britt detailed a lot of stuff that I thought was interesting with that Pelicans matchup as well. We're recording this probably going to come out late afternoon, early evening on Thursday. That column, on Wednesday, and that column will be up on Thursday morning over at Min Post. So, yeah, I know all you listen to this podcast, but don't give up on writing either. I've given up on writing, but I still read. I still do read. And
well, I mean, for writing for me is talking off the top of my head. If I'm writing something, it's something that I've thought a lot more about. It doesn't necessarily mean it's better or worse. My vocabulary is different. I love words. In this particular column, I don't think there's, for the people who don't like the big words, there's not as many big words this time. But in general, I think that it's two different aspects of the way I like.
You did say attitudinal and cital and a couple other. You saved your big words. I know what those mean. I think
attitudinal. Give me a break. If attitudinal is a big word, we're all in trouble.
I know what sidling means. I'm not sure everyone knows what sidling means.
Well, you just watch slow-mo and you can see him sidle.
All right. Yes. Sorry, I cut off your.
Oh no, that's right. No, I was fine. I'm. People know by now. I mean, I've been writing a long time. The podcast has been a wonderful extension of the way I express myself about basketball. I love the fact that people enjoy it and that you have the forum for it. But writing will always be my first love because that's the way I identify myself.
Yeah. No, and it does bring a different. I mean, that's why I really like doing these episodes when they happen to be like the day after or day of that you've written something, because you do really distill down your thoughts in not just you but everyone, I think, when we write, and it makes for a better conversation. And I just think it's a worthwhile exercise for, if you're listening to this podcast at the hour and 24-minute mark of a random Wednesday afternoon, you probably love hoops, love the Wolves, and love this type of conversation. And Britt writes this type of conversation. So do check that out over at Min Post. Sign up for the newsletter. Obviously, you probably already follow Britt on Twitter at Britt Robson. Next up for us with the pod, Kyle and I will go on Friday morning after the Wolves play on Thursday night. So Kyle and I will probably talk about that Mavericks game and whatever does or doesn't happen in page 2 of the hard part of the season. So Britt, appreciate you doing it. Until Friday with Kyle. He's Britt. I'm Dane. Peace out.
How I'm feeling, man, I hope it never stop, yeah. Green and hot so you can find me in the crowd, yeah, yeah. Don't let standards ever bring you down, yeah.